All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Don't count me among those who are surprised that the Las Vegas Raiders fired head coach Josh McDaniels, as he should have never gotten the job in the first place. In 25 games with the Raiders, McDaniel's record was 9 and 16 as he took a team that made the playoffs in 2021 and returned them to being the laughing stock that they've been for the last 2 decades. But again, like I previously said, McDaniels should have never gotten the Raiders job in the first place. And don't feel sorry for the Raiders today either. The Raiders fans, yes, but not the organization. Now, once upon a time, Josh McDaniels was the head coach of the Denver Broncos, where he was fired after compiling a record of 11 and 17. And in being fired by the Raiders, McDaniels becomes the first NFL head coach in the Super Bowl era to be fired by two different gigs in less than 2 seasons, with both clubs not even having him as an interim head coach. He was the head coach. But after seeing how McDaniels destroyed the Broncos in such a short period of time and how he left the Indianapolis Colts at the altar, what possessed Raiders owner Mark Davis to say, I want this guy to go out there and lead my team? Now, after the John Gruden fiasco in 2021, Davis was seeking a big name as his next head coach. But what he should have done was to have read between the lines and seen how the Raiders responded in 2021 to interim head coach Rich Bisaccia. That should have been the guy to lead the silver and black, not McDaniels. Now, don't get me wrong, Derek Carr, whether it was with the Raiders or now with the Saints, he's not a Hall of Fame quarterback. But as so many with so many question marks about Derek Carr, or around Derek Carr rather, he was and still is better than what the Raiders have at quarterback currently. You think about it. McDaniels ran Derek Carr off because he never wanted him. While he's still counting towards their cap this year as far as dead money, and he replaced Derek Carr with Gigolo Jimmy G of all people, who has now been benched by interim head coach Antonio Pierce for the rookie out of Purdue, Aiden O'Connell. Now, Mark Davis went after Josh McDaniels, citing McDaniels' offensive system as well as his time with the New England Patriots as an assistant coach, most notably as an offensive coordinator there. But let's be realistic. Any of us would have looked good calling plays when you got Tom Brady at quarterback. I'll tell you right now, three guys, two retired, and another one who's still in the NFL, but he's injured right now. Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, and Tom Brady. Those three guys right there made a lot of offensive coaches rich because anybody can look good when they're the offensive coordinator for one of those three. Anybody can look like they know what they're doing, as a quarterback coach or an offensive assistant when you got either Brady, Manning, or Rodgers doing the things. Chelsea Grin, I totally agree with you. A waste of space was going on, man. It was a comedy of errors, and the Raiders are a calamity of errors, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute. Just hold tight right there. But for me, this is once again another example of another Bill Belichick head coach that can't get it done. Why? Because we've seen it so many times around the NFL. These former New England Patriots assistants, regardless of the side of the ball, more often than not, they try to go to their next stop when they become a head coach and they try to go out there and try to be Belichick. It worked because it's not working for Belichick anymore. It worked for Belichick for so many years. Why? Because you had that guy at quarterback in Tom Brady, excuse me, that was able to mask so many deficiencies for the New England Patriots. And now without Brady, we're seeing that Belichick might not be the genius that everybody had him out to be. Now, so often you get those Patriots coaches, they try to go to other places, they try to do that Belichick way, and guess what? It just doesn't work. We saw this in Denver. What made you think, if you're the Raiders, that things were going to be any different with Josh McDaniels this time around? I don't know what Josh McDaniels went into Mark Davis's office and sold him on, because clearly it was a bag of lies. But it didn't. You go back to Denver. It didn't take McDaniels that long there to run off a Pro Bowl quarterback, excuse me, and Jay Cutler. And before you knew it, wide receiver Brandon Marshall was gone as well. And let's not forget that in Denver, Josh McDaniels was the same guy in 2010 that traded back into the first round to take Tim Tebow. I'll just leave it there. Okay. So you look at it like this: before Gruden's firing, and say whatever you want about Gruden, he was cleaning up the Raiders' mess. And then when he was gone and Bisaccia was promoted, the players bought into what Bisaccia was selling. Because you look at that Raiders team, they rallied, they made the postseason, and they had a legit chance to beat the Cincinnati Bengals in that wild card game. And of course, if you're the Raiders, you sit back and say, well, what could have been? Because it was the Bengals who got on that run and got to the Super Bowl that year. But in less than 2 years, with all of what Gruden was trying to work on and what Basacci was trying to take care of, he's gone out there and destroyed it. And you look at this Raiders team right now, and I guarantee you that Mark Davis did not want to fire Josh McDaniels, but he had no choice. And because of that, he's now paying two head coaches in Gruden and McDaniels to not coach this team. But you look at the public outcry as far as how fans were confronting Mark Davis, how fans really, left their emotions on their sleeves, if you will, about this whole situation. And let's not forget the bad losses on Josh McDaniels' watch with the Raiders, blowing that big lead at home against the Arizona Cardinals last year. Jeff Saturday, with no experience whatsoever, even as an assistant coach at any point in the NFL, comes in, and his first and only win last year as the interim head coach of the Indianapolis Colts came against the Las Vegas Raiders and Josh McDaniels at home at Allegiant Stadium in Vegas. And then, you go to this year, and I think the worst loss out of all of the Raiders' losses so far this season, 2 weeks ago against the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field. You're breaking in a new rookie quarterback for the Bears, never played before. And you know what? He carved that Raiders defense up like a Christmas ham. And honestly, the Raiders looked flat from the word go, and they have not recovered from that. So at the end of the day, Mark Davis didn't want to, but he didn't have a choice to do what he did. Now, the Raiders, they are wasting the prime years of Devontae Adams at wide receiver. Went out there and make that big move to reunite him with his college quarterback in Derek Carr. And then after 1 year, you know what? You move on from Carr. They're wasting the prime years of running back Josh Jacobs, wasting the prime years of defensive end Max Crosby. And what makes it worse is that, obviously the Raiders look like they're going to be once again starting over. And you didn't make any attempts prior to the trade deadline yesterday to say, hey, you know what? Let's move some of these guys. Let's give some draft compensation back and let's completely start over. No. So I'm looking at it like this. Aside from hosting the Super Bowl in February, what do the Raiders have going for them right now? And I'm going to say a whole lot of nothing, because I'm going to look at it like this: it's going to be very interesting come Sunday, because they're set to host the New York Football Giants, another team that has been underachieving this year, another team that's trying to figure out where they're heading. Okay. And the Giants are going to look to get back on track with their starting quarterback. However, the caveat for me is this: teams typically respond when there's a head coaching change. And of course, not just a head coaching change, because Dave Ziegler, the general manager, he got his walking papers as well. So you got a new interim general manager and Champ Kelly. And let's not forget, offensive coordinator Mick Lombardi got his walking papers too. But the caveat for me right here: Antonio Pierce is taking over as the interim head coach for the Raiders. And of course, Antonio Pierce's highlight of his NFL career came with the New York Giants in 2007, when he was their starting middle linebacker when they won the Super Bowl. And of course, pulled off the upset of all upsets in Super Bowl history by knocking off the previously undefeated New England Patriots. Antonio Pierce, he finished his career with the Giants. He left on good terms, but I guarantee you, a former player going up against a former employer, now as coach, in his first game, and he's looking to get the full time gig with the Raiders. I'll tell you like this: I think this Raiders team is going to be very motivated come Sunday afternoon when they host the Giants. But the biggest question for me is, because it's been so long that the Raiders have been bad. We're talking about 20 years of this, and who knew when the Raiders lost Super Bowl? I think it was 36 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers down there in San Diego, Qualcomm Stadium, the old Jack Murphy Stadium that no longer exists. Who knew that when the Raiders walked off the field that day, that 20 years later, this team still would have not won a playoff game. Since Super Bowl 36, the Raiders have only had one playoff appearance that came 2 years ago under Rich Bisaccia. So obviously, that there's been a lot of futility going back to the Bay, and credit to Raider fans, because Raider fans in the last 20 years have shown how loyal they are to this team, because they would still come out there to the Coliseum and in the black hole and show love for this team. They're coming to Allegiant Stadium in Vegas showing love for this team. But there's an NFL generation, if you will, that has grown up, and they don't know how important that the Raiders once were to the NFL. How, they were at one point the standard of excellence in the NFL. And I mean, we can go down the list as far as a who's who of Hall of Fame players that put on the silver and black, from Willie Brown to Howie Long to Ken Stabler, to Gene Upshaw, Art Shell, Jim Otto, Fred Bolitnikoff. I mean, you think about it, so many great games with the Raiders in the 60s and 70s. And of course, all of those narrations by the late John Facenda for NFL films. The Raiders were a part of the NFL becoming the NFL. And of course, the AFL as well. And, the Raiders have been so bad for so long that, you know what, we just expect them to go out there and be bad. But I'll tell you like this: the Raiders are one of those organizations, when they are good, it's better for the NFL. And the Raiders need to find a way to get back to that, because it has been too long since the Raiders have been this bad. But, getting back to McDaniels, and my question is this the end of his head coaching opportunities in the NFL? I mean, I'm not here to like sound bad or whatever like that. I'm just trying to be honest. But I don't see how anybody could give Josh McDaniels another opportunity to be an NFL head coach. You're talking about a guy who's 20 and 33. He got fired in each one of his stops before his second season even finished. And honestly, outside of being the offensive coordinator of the New England Patriots, he really hasn't shown a lot of success. Remember, after leaving the Broncos, he was an assistant coach with the St. Louis Rams before that didn't work out. And then he went back to New England. And once again, he looked good as an offensive coordinator when Tom Brady was a quarterback. Now, I will say this: if things do happen where McDaniels does go back to New England, I think that would be the best case scenario for him, because I think he's a guy that is showing that he can be the big fish in a small pond. But what he does there doesn't, it doesn't work outside of those walls at Gillette Stadium. It's a scenario. I mean, right now, of course, the Patriots have Bill O'Brien as their offensive coordinator. But I will say, uh, for the Patriots' young quarterback in Mac Jones, he looked his best in 2021, which was his rookie season. That was also the one year where he had Josh McDaniels as his offensive coordinator. Bill Belichick didn't do Mac Jones any favors last year by having Matt Patricia and Joe Judge be the co-offensive coordinators. I mean, it was a train wreck from the word go. At least Bill Bryant gives them some semblance of order. But would they bring Josh McDaniels into that fray, back into that fray rather? I'm not sure. But honestly, after what has transpired, I don't see how any NFL team could ever even think about giving Josh McDaniels an interview to ever be a head coach again, more or less hire him. But getting back to the Raiders, will Mark Davis get control of this team? And when I say get control of this team, get the Raiders back to being a success. Because again, like I said, there's a generation out there that doesn't know that once upon a time, the Raiders were the cream of the crop in the National Football League. The Raiders have missed on so many key personnel decisions and positions. Um, over the last 20 years. And when you miss on your general manager hires, when you miss on your head coaching hires, when you miss on your first round picks, especially in the top 10, when you miss on finding a franchise quarterback, it each one of those mistakes sets your organization back. And I'm going to go down a list here of some of the names that have been the Raiders head coach, since 2003. We've had Bill Callahan. We had North Turner. We had Art Shell. We had Lane Kiffin. We had Tom Cable, Hugh Jackson, okay, Dennis Allen, Tony Sperano, Jack Del Rio, John Gruden, Rich Bisaccia, and of course, Josh McDaniels. That's a lot of names for 20 years. And it's 20 years of futility. The Raiders got to get back to finding, first and foremost, they got to find out who's going to lead their front office. Then they have to find out who's going to be their next head coach. Then they have to find out who their quarterback is going to be, because obviously Jimmy G is not the quarterback of the future for the Raiders. And I'm not sure if Aiden O'Connell is, but hey, at this point of the season, he's the best that you have. He gives you a better opportunity to win than Jimmy G. And you know what? You got to go out there and see what this young man can and cannot do. So the Raiders have to figure those three things out before they do anything else. Obviously, if the Raiders are going to start over, like I said, I would have been fielding calls prior to the trade deadline to see what you can get back for Devontae Adams. And the Raiders are going to have to do that over the offseason. I would, because this is not going to be a quick fix. And it doesn't make sense to have a guy the caliber of Devontae Adams there wasting his talent. And there's going to be a team around the NFL that's going to offer you something for a guy of his magnitude. And I would say, you know what? Go out there and try to get some picks. But in getting those picks, you still got to go out there and hit on those picks. Draft picks are one thing, but it's all about finding talent, evaluating talent, and developing that talent if you want to win. Again, Mark Davis did something that he didn't want to do, but I give him the credit for doing it. He checked his ego at the door. He just sucked it up and said, you know what? We can't keep doing this. Okay. And the thing is like, you know what? I think that was the first step in him possibly once again getting control of his football team. It's bad, and it's been so bad so long for the Las Vegas Raiders. Hopefully, hopefully the Raiders can find a way to get on track once again. But at least they were able to finally walk away from this Josh McDaniels fiasco. Like I said, he should have never been hired in the first place. He's a team killer, if you will, as far as what happens. On the flip side, for the Denver Broncos, they moved on from Josh McDaniels and they were able to turn things around very quickly. Of course, they lucked out in getting Peyton Manning in free agency. I'm not sure if the Raiders are going to have a scenario like that, but hey, hope springs eternal. Maybe now the Raiders can find a way to get back on track. But if they're able to do it, obviously they won't do it. They're going to do it without Josh McDaniels. But nonetheless, this move had to be made. Josh McDaniels left Mark Davis no choice. And let's see, maybe, just maybe, if the silver and black can finally get on track. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now, you can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Chelsea Grin, as always, thank you for chiming in. Thanks for the support. And we're going to have plenty to talk about this weekend with both some good NFL action and some good college action. Waste of Space, as always, thanks for the support as well. And keep on chiming in. And folks, once again, my name is William Martin. I am signing off. And I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.